A long time ago, I first got Game Maker Studio when I had no idea how to make a game. I knew it was complicated, but I had no idea just how complicated it actually was, and I really didn't get anywhere from it. After that, every once in a while, I would get a new program and try to learn it, but again, I'd always end up uninstalling it after a bit. But now, I've tried Unreal Engine, and for the first time, I've actually had some success. So now I've decided to show what I've been able to do, and also give some advice for anyone who wants to start using Unreal, as I think it's probably one of the better options for people who have absolutely no idea how code works. Also, I don't have too much footage of when I was making the game because I really didn't think I'd get this far. Anyways, the idea for the game was some sort of a 3D adventure game, pretty basic, as again, I didn't know if I'd get anywhere. I also wanted to add some sort of collection element to it if I could. The hardest part is always in the beginning, and just learning where everything is and what everything does. The first thing I started with was the character, and just trying to get the movement right. Since I wanted the player character to be a blobber, I knew I'd have to make some big adjustments to the base character. That took a while, just understanding how Unreal works. Though I found the blueprint system a lot easier to understand than coding. Blueprints are kind of like bits of code in a box. So instead of having to perfectly write out the code, you can just put down the node instead. You can then connect them to other nodes. I've worked with Blender for a while, so this kind of reminded me of making materials, which also uses nodes, except Unreal has a lot more. Once I eventually got the character to an acceptable state, I moved on to making the environment, since I was getting tired of looking at the spawn area. I already had made things in Blender for my animations, but I wasn't sure how it would work when importing them. It took a bit to figure it out, but in the end I managed to get them with a bit of adjusting. I was also worried I'd have to manually add collision, but luckily I was able to just use the collision of the mesh with this option that took me way too long to find. Unfortunately, materials do not transfer over, so you'll have to remake those. There's still a lot about the material editor that I haven't figured out yet, so I'm not going to talk too much about that. I really just figured out the bare minimum to get what I needed for this game. Really, the main thing I wish I knew when making materials for the first time was that by holding down 1 and pressing the left mouse button, you can make this node with a number that you can change. This definitely was the most important node, as it allows you to change values of pretty much all the other nodes. So, pretty important. Actually, in Unreal Engine 5.1, they just updated it so that you can change node values right away without having to add that other node. So it's not as important anymore. The next thing I tried to make was the dialogue system. And oh boy, this was a lot harder than I thought it'd be. See, what I had in mind was for the letters to appear one at a time. A lot of games use this, so I didn't think it'd be too hard to make, but it was that hard. I'm not going to go through all the things I tried, or how I decided to make it the way it ended up, but I will explain how it works in the end. First, the blueprint gets the data table, which holds all the text. Then it goes through all of them until it finds the row ID that matches with the current one the actor has. Then it gets the text on that row and adds it to a text variable array. Then when you interact with it, it freezes your player to avoid errors, then gets the player's position in the world and rotates the actor to face them. Then it creates a dialogue widget and gets the length of the text. Then it gets one letter at a time and changes the text in the widget to that. It then cycles through each of the letters until it reaches the end of the text. Then it allows you to press next or walk away. If you press next, it will get the text on the next row. If you leave, it will reset back to the original row. At this point, I began to realize that I might actually be able to make this game. So next up is the part of the game that I most wanted to make, but also knew would be the hardest, the collection part. The thing I had in mind as being the collectible was bread. Don't ask why. Again, I'm not going to go through all the different things I tried, or how I ended up going with what I did, because honestly I don't remember exactly, but I will show how I got it working in the end. Basically, when you touch the bread, it will play this whole animation and music thing. Then it will look to see what bread ID it has in the data table. Then, once it finds it, it will add it to the bread collection data in the game instances. Then, if you open your inventory, it will go through the same bread collection data and display what it sees there. There is, of course, a lot more to it that I'm just leaving out for simplicity. It took me quite a while to figure out how things worked and the best way to use them, but that's pretty much the end result of it all. Now, with what I thought was the really hard stuff out of the way, I began to relax a bit. There was still a lot that needed to be made, but nothing that I thought would really be a problem. After that, I made some more things, like a trampoline, this orange shooting robot, some targets that you have to throw crates at, and a spacebar challenge minigame, which was a bit of a pain, but I got it working. But then, as everything was going well, I started working on Big Blob's Bakery. Now, whenever I see this face, I start to get stressed out. This was definitely the hardest thing to make. The way this works is by making the main shop menu widget. Then it makes an item widget and adds it to that widget. And because it's 4 items, it makes that widget 4 times, which are then each added to a grid panel. And each of those widgets know which item they are, depending on what index they are. Number 1 is the red licorice tasty bar, which allows you to do this boost forward thing when you hold shift and space. The second one is the cookie pack, which I originally wanted to allow you to throw cookies, but in the end I decided to just make those crate things, so now it just gives you another jump. After that is the milk, which also gives you another jump, which means you can jump 3 times in total, which I thought was cool. Then is the fluffy bread, which just acts as another bread collectible. Then I had to figure out the whole thing of buying something and having it remember you bought it, which I kind of gave up with after a while. I just made a variable for each of them that gets turned off depending on which one you buy. This is definitely not a good way of doing this, and if I were making a bigger game with hundreds of items, this would definitely not work, but for my first game with only 4 items, I decided to just go with it. During the many weeks of trying to make this thing work, I also made a lot of other things, such as this screw currency that's used to buy things, some more ways of getting bread, the interior of Smoothie Slush, the castle, and the main menu, which after the horror of Big Blobby's Bakery was not too hard to make. After this, it was really just polishing the game and making it right, adding better materials, fixing bugs, which there were a lot of, and making art where it needed it. Now, there is a lot that I skipped over, like the sound effects. For most of those, I just kind of got them from places or made some of the more important sounds myself. I thought adding sound effects might be hard like everything else, but luckily it actually wasn't that bad. I had a bit of trouble importing the right format. For some reason, even though I exported it as a WAV file, which it said Unreal Engine needed, it wouldn't accept it, but then I used this converter thing to convert it from a WAV file to a WAV file, and then it accepted it for some weird reason. Also, I had a lot of trouble getting the video files to play. Like, I spent a good 5 hours just trying to get this to work. Turns out what you have to do is enable this plugin thing, then make all these different media player parts. Then you have to put the videos you want in a folder called movies, and it has to be called movies or else it won't accept it. And make a part somewhere in the blueprint that calls in which media player file you want. I don't know, it's just a lot of steps that feels way too complicated for just adding a video. Especially since adding music is so simple. But I'm not going to go into it all now. There were also a lot of things that I wanted to add, but just couldn't for one reason or another. Sometimes I'd have an idea for something of how I wanted it to work, but then end up doing something else since it seems more fun. Like, I had the idea for going over to these boxes and then just hitting them when they disappear, but at the end I gave them physics so that when you hit them they just go flying, since that was kind of fun. Also, since this was my first time making a game, There are a lot of blueprints that I feel like are barely working, and I'm glad I made the game as small as I did, because if I had to work on it much longer, I know I'd have to go back and change a lot. When I work on bigger projects in the future, I'm definitely going to prioritize making things stable and easy to read and easy to edit. There's nothing worse than having to fix a blueprint, going in and seeing this. Like, where do you even begin? I completely forget what anything even does. Making a game was definitely one of the hardest things to learn. I'm just glad I already knew how to make models, rigs, music, sound effects, and art before, or else I would have had a lot harder of a time. Making a game kind of feels like the final boss of creative mediums. It combines everything I've learned to make and requires everything to work perfectly together. Overall, I'm pretty happy with how it turned out. I originally started this project on August 1st, 2022, so that's about 8 months from when I'm recording this. I don't currently have the game done, but it's very close, and by the time this video comes out, there should be a link to it in the description. Also, it's free, of course. I'm not sure what I'm going to do next, but I'm definitely going to keep making games, as hard as it is.